Well, I want to welcome everyone tonight. Thanks for coming out. We've had lots of different forums and opportunities to be in the public, but this is definitely the most unique and kind of fun and different forum. So we're excited to be a part of this. And on behalf of the whole council, we'd like to thank Lynn for your work putting all this together and getting the council chambers pulled together and doing an agenda. So thank you for being creative and pulling all this together. So with that, we thought since we're doing a council meeting, we should do the pledge. So let's all stand, and I'd ask Councilwoman Scholl to lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And are you the city manager? It's going to be hard for me not to say Senator Fan, but city manager, could you please approach? Thanks for stepping in. All right, we're going to jump right into your agenda that you have there in front of you. And Clerk Vinnie is going to read that for us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It's an honor to be here this evening. My name is Vinnie Gallegos, and humbled to be up here with you. So I'll read regular agenda item number 1. There is several questions in this one, so be prepared. The rest are a little bit shorter. Discuss whether to support an expenditure of not more than $30,000 to do an economic impact study specifically for the golf course. Should the golf course continue to receive subsidy from the general fund? What should happen with the golf course loan from the general fund? And should the loan be forgiven? Is there a way to make the golf course self-sustaining?
Good, thank you. So it's my understanding that we're going to discuss this as a council and try to come around some ideas, hopefully. And so I don't think that you need to concern yourself with just speaking one time. You may jump in a couple different times. It'd be fine, just like we would in a normal council meeting. So open for questions, comments from the council. Yes, Councilman Vichica.
Good job. So I think what we're seeing here nationwide, and from the report that we're getting from the general, the budget book as well, is we're seeing higher revenues for the golf course. So with that, and seeing that the national trends are positive for golf in general, even having them in part of the Olympics has been kind of a big deal as well. And I had a soft spot there because I was on the 18th green for the gold medal shot. So what I think we could do though is we could set a date for repayments on plans and have a definitive criteria to decide whether we're going to subsidize or not for the future. I think the subsidy we're getting now is important, especially for economic development going forward. However, the $30,000 economic impact study I don't feel is necessary because we have a lot of our own data to show what's happening. I'd rather spend that money for firefighters or police so we can fight the fire that's in the Bradshaw Mountains.
Great. Other comments from the council? Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I believe that government exists to provide essential services, and I don't think a golf course is necessarily an essential service. However, that being said, I think it is appropriate to consider ancillary services and how they can be utilized to make our community continuing as an attractive place for retirees particularly. In my experience as a golfer and watching the golf industry over the last number of years, the number of rounds is actually declining nationwide. However, as a retirement community, I think we can probably expect that there will be a continued demand for golfing, especially public golfing here in the community. So that being said, what do we do with this? Well, we have a contract with Billy Casper Golf to manage this course, and we've been able to reduce the financial deficit to the city with their management. However, it's not yet producing a net revenue. I think it's capable of doing that. I think a $30,000 investment in a professional study to find out whether we should continue with the arrangement we have, or perhaps put this out to bid for a more effective management is probably a reasonable expenditure. I believe in evidence-based decision-making, and rather than deal with anecdotal conditions, like personally, I was playing 2 weeks ago, and on the second hole, the tee marker post had been leaning. So what did I see? I saw 2 city trucks with 4 employees taking turns trying to wiggle this post and see if they could fix it. Now, if that was a private company, I have a feeling they would be using at least half, if not 3/4 less labor involved in a maintenance issue like this. So I think if we really took a good study and were able to have some broader analysis of the function of this golf course, we could probably turn it into maybe a net revenue and eliminate the deficit that we're running with. So I would support that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Good. So you'd be in favor of the economic impact study?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay, go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, I'm mostly in agreement with Phil. I would like to see us do an economic impact study. I think it's important before we are making decisions on whether or not we should expect the golf course to be sustaining and what types of revenue it should be bringing in. We need quantitative information in front of us about the impact it's having on our economy. Well, the golf course has been losing money in past years. Maybe it's making up for that in revenue that's coming from sales tax for those people who are spending money in our city. So I think there is a benefit to having quantitative information in front of us before determining if we should be expecting the golf course to be self-sustaining.
Good, thank you.
Joe, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I just want to make a really quick point here. We have some quantitative information to see that the golf course is improving its revenue, and this is from the budget book. We can see that this year it would have actually turned a profit if we had not bought the golf carts that we just did. We're seeing the positive trends. We have a lot of data in front of us to make some decisions. And I still don't think that we need the economic impact study. I'd rather spend that money other places.
Good, thank you.
Well, to respond to that, I'd like to see a study seeing if we can completely outsource this operation. We're not doing that now. We've got city employees at the golf course that are being managed by a private company. And having a long professional career in private management, trying to effectively manage employees who work for somebody else is difficult, if not impossible, to do well.
Sure.
Additionally, as far as the loan, should we discuss that now, or is that going to be a...
That's fine, we can do the whole thing here, yeah.
The proposal that we write off this loan as uncollectible is not something I'm willing to consider at this time. I don't know the terms and conditions of this loan. I'd like to see what they are. Apparently, it's probably not collateralized. But to just write this off and to give Billy Casper Golf almost a windfall by writing off this liability on their balance sheets, I don't think is in the best interest of the city. Maybe we could negotiate something. Maybe all the golfers in the city could get a free round of golf, and all the non-golfers could get a free meal at the Manzanita Grill. That would be a lot better than just writing this off. So I think that needs to be looked at in much more detail.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Phil. Yes, Connie.
I'm in agreement for outsourcing a possible option. The trend nationally for golf courses is in a decline, and I think it has something to do with the economic impact. Even though ours is doing better now through better management, I believe, I understand through some of the income from golf courses, a lot of it's made at the bar, and the subsidy of the bar. Maybe in this case, if more money was put into the bar and make it more of an attraction, it might actually make a little bit more money in the long run. I'm not in favor of spending the money on a study either. I think exactly what Joe said, the budget is showing that it has been in the red for a long time. And as far as forgiving the loan, I'm not for forgiving. Even if they make a couple $100 a month payment, I think it needs to be paid off.
Yeah, good.
That's taxpayer money.
Councilman Blair?
Well, I'd have to say that the enterprise fund that the wisdom of a past council, put the golf course in an enterprise fund, which means that they had to sustain their own sustainability as far as rounds and capital adventure out there. From my standpoint, with my background in education from ASU and Parks and Recreation and park development, recreation never pays for itself, number one, nor will a golf course ever pay for itself, no matter how you look at it. We in the city of Prescott bought a golf course many years ago and also a second 18-hole golf course, sold it to the public as a golf course. We bring in hundreds of thousands of golfers a year. It's an economic engine in this community. We don't need to spend $30,000 of general fund money to recognize that. All you have to do is ask the very people in the bed and breakfast industry and the hotel industry what those packages are worth, or go out and look at the father and son tournament or the smoke eye tournament and understand those 3 and 4 day events are filling the hotel rooms. It's an economic driver. To take an asset of the city of Prescott, which is many acres that face houses that are purchased by people that live in this community, and turn it over to private industry, I'm absolutely against. That's why the council took the direction they did, is for us to maintain our asset, hire an operation company to operate it, and as you'll see in the future, this is a very new company. Give it time and it will turn itself around. But to keep having this count balance to improve infrastructure at the golf course is crazy. We don't do that for Parks and Recreation. We shouldn't do it for the golf course.
I agree with that, absolutely. But again, that loan does need to be paid back, and since there are no studies, how many rounds of golf are played there? Has anybody ever figured that out?
Well, I know that, talking to the Recreation Department, that we have done some work with Billy Casper a couple of years ago to get a better understanding of the economic impact it has in our city. And that is available, and there's some very good information in there. This is also a company, remember, that does a lot of this across the country, so they have a very good feel for our kinds of market and the kind of economic impact it does have in our city. So I think there's some good numbers there that we could look at from Billy Casper to kind of help make this decision without spending the money. Furthermore, we have to really think about the intrinsic value in our city. This is something that can't be measured. When you have Embry-Riddle, you have the high school, you have charter schools, and you have other schools out there utilizing that facility, I think there is definitely some intrinsic value to our city. Furthermore, all of the charity events that happen out there and all the money that's raised through those charity events and then is funneled back into our local charities is very important for our community. So the economic impact study would be important, I think, but I would not be in favor of $30,000 spent on it. I think we can get that money from the budget, also from Billy Casper. I think they have some numbers we could look at. But keep in mind, you can't quantify the total value of that asset just by looking at dollars and cents on a page. So I think it's important to remember that. It's also good to have that asset up there when you're looking at different developments that are happening in that area, because then those developments will then likely utilize this golf course. And so I think it's a good asset for our community in that area. Any other comments from the council? Okay. If seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Vinny?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Approve the annexation of land along Senator Highway up to but not including Upper Sky Terrace Drive. And please note, this is an imaginary project. There is no development called Horseman Hills.
Okay, thank you. Any questions about this for the city manager before we jump into comments?
I actually do have a question. Do we have any sort of idea of what kind of acreage we're talking on this?
Councilwoman Alexa, I was not given that information. Looking up there, it looks like it could be easily 100 acres. So let's run with that.
Could I make a comment?
Certainly.
So I actually, Councilman Alexa, or Councilwoman, excuse me, I actually went online and I pulled just really rough estimates for what that would be using technology. Roughly about 60 acres would be the size of that, yeah. So it wouldn't fall under Proposition 400 regulation.
Very good, thank
That's
you.
a good clarification.
Do you want a
Council-
job with staff? We can.
Councilman Blair.
Well, first of all, I'd have to say, you need to recognize whether the city's infrastructure can handle the new proposed development. And that infrastructure means water, sewer, also gas, and all the private utilities that go along with it. Fire-wise, and being able to move people in an emergency is important. Secondary access in a project, important. I would never preclude having somebody wanting to come into the city until I see their plan. And their plan should specifically call out secondary access, primary access. In the past, there has been developments that have been turned down because Senator Highway can't handle those types of developments out there. However, on the other hand, when it develops in the county, that means you have Wildcat subdivision, you have wells that are in the county, you have septic systems that leach into our water underground services. So there are very specific things that you need to look at, and before I'd vote yes or no on this project, I'd have to send it back to Planning and Zoning and get some more particulars on it.
Good, yeah, Councilman Good.
Well, as a commissioner on planning and zoning, I've had a chance to analyze a number of these types of developments for potential annexation and their impact on the city. Of course, we know that SB 1525 that was passed in 2012 virtually eliminates our ability to charge impact fees for developments like this. So we have to know whether our current infrastructure can handle the additional capacity that such a development would demand on sewer, water, wastewater, solid waste, etc. And we also need to consider what the impact would be on traffic. I mean, this particular proposal would bring literally hundreds of additional vehicle trips per day down Senator Highway. And I think that could be a real problem. So a really effective and thorough traffic study from our traffic department would absolutely have to be considered before we make a decision in this area. You know, the difference between annexation and bringing these developments into the city is the difference between whether we can have some impact on those problems, or we allow a developer to decide, well, I'm going to subdevelop or turn this into 36-acre parcels and then put septic and wells in. And considering the topography, we could have problems with those types of septic-type systems. But I don't think we should be held hostage by developers who make that almost a veiled threat. I think it's important, especially what's happening right now with a significant number of developments coming online and their impact on our general fund. We're going to have to provide police and fire services to these additional developments, and that directly impacts our general fund revenue. So until we have a clearer picture of what our general fund is going to be relative to the pension liabilities, I think we need to take a very slow approach to any additional annexation consideration.
Okay. Councilwoman Cantelmi.
Mayor Gregg, council people, since it's hypothetical, I'm just going to play devil's advocate. I'm not advocating for this annexation because obviously we don't have enough details. But just looking at the topography, as Phil said, most of these homes that would be in there, and I believe it was 55 single-family homes and 12-unit apartment building. Just a quick calculation of the property taxes, given the fact that it is going to be a hard dig, these are probably going to be very expensive homes. We could be talking about maybe $500,000, $500,000 a year property tax income into the general fund just from some of this development. Most of the homes in that area are very large, and their taxes, I'm guessing, are $4,000 to $5,000 a year. So just playing devil's advocate, that is a consideration that we need to look at.
Good. Yes, Councilman Bachika.
Thank you, Mayor. So I actually agree with Phil on, we should really be looking at seeing if we're going to need to be paying for offsite improvements. I think the developer would fall under that. A traffic study, I think, is incredibly important for a project like this, especially because it's going down Senator Highway, which is Mount Vernon. It's going to cross one of the most historic streets we have in town. A couple other questions I had. Trails and open space, are they going to be part of the project? Will the project include any commercial land? Because the city's policy right now is to annex commercial over private property. And if this doesn't include any commercial, I'd be really skeptical if it doesn't reach any of the other city's goals as well, as per the annexation policy. Also, is there any historical or topological features that need to be thought about for this? And just a really quick question, how tall is the apartment building? Do we know?
Tall enough.
2 stories. Okay. Thank you, Mayor.
Yes. Councilwoman Scholl.
So when I was first reading over this agenda and I came across this agenda item, I immediately went to the general plan, which I've been referring to a lot when talking about and thinking about issues that our city's facing, because it's a voter-approved document, and I think we should be looking at it and considering it more, because I think this document has a lot of weight behind it coming from the voters. And so I have to agree with Joe and Phil on this. I don't see, based on what is outlined in our general plan, really how this annexation would be in line with what it says. It talks about outlying areas and low-density housing developments are less efficient uses of lands, traffic impacts, having to extend infrastructure out into those outlying areas. And so just based on some of those concerns, I'd have to, again, see more information on the development plans, but I just have some concerns.
There seems to be a lot more questions than answers on this one. Just it's hard for us, I think, to look at this with the detail that we have and really make a decision on this. There is a process here in our city, a very good process, where you use the general plan, the land development code, planning and zoning, and there's a lengthy process where these developments are vetted, and so really we need to trust that process. Furthermore, this is not large enough to go to Prop 400, therefore there would not be a cost-benefit analysis required. Yet I think it would be a good thing, even on this size of development, to see a cost-benefit analysis to really know if it's worth the city to even consider this. Furthermore, I agree with all the other comments in regard to the infrastructure, the traffic studies, those kinds of things. There's a lot of different impacts that we need to look at. I don't think the cost-benefit analysis would be favorable, given there's no commercial node involved in this, and so there's really not a lot of benefit directly to the city. So again, I think we'd need to trust the process on this and take a look at that data once we received it after it went through that process. Moving on, unless you guys have other comments. Okay. Let's go to the agenda item number 3.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Convert the Ernest A. Love Airport into the Ernest A. Love Regional Airport by asking neighboring communities to bring in investment dollars as part of their buy-in.
Okay, this has been a topic that we've talked a lot about in different forums, and great opportunity for our council to weigh in on that. Comments, Councilman Blair.
Dialogue between the entities. Several years ago, there was a dialogue that said that we could never have a regional communication center. And over a 2-year period of time with Central Yavapai Fire District and the fire departments and the police departments throughout the region, we came together with an understanding that we could make it happen, save money for the citizens in Yavapai County and Prescott, Arizona. The airport is indeed a need. It is a regional hub based upon the county being recognized and moving up in population to where we went from 3 supervisors to 5. That tells you what our population is in Yavapai County. I think it's definitely a need to have communication with Prescott Valley, Chino Valley, Yavapai County, Dewey Humboldt, to see what their input would be. And understanding that the city of Prescott owns the property, owns the airport, it's going to be a very difficult coin to flip to have them come to the table with monies to be able to provide their share of what the economic benefit would be to the airport. Because there is some folks out there would say right now, why would we pay for anything to do with Ernest A. Love Field when we can use it for free right now? So it's going to take a huge deal, Ms. City Manager and staff, to have long conversations with the different communities out there to bring people to the table and let them recognize that I-17 is a traffic jam. We're up here in a world of trouble in the next 5 to 10 years, and that we really need to have a regional airport. We need to have a regional place for people to get on an airplane and fly to Phoenix and fly to other places. So I think it's important that we look at all avenues, but it is going to be a tough road to hoe.
Okay. Councilman Good?
Well, I agree with Councilman Blair. The necessity to have a regional cooperation in this area is pretty essential. If we have any expectation for legitimate economic growth, we have to have a modern, reliable airport aviation service out of this airport. And I talked to Mayor Croft in Chino Valley. I had lunch with Mayor Skoog in Prescott Valley and talked to their city manager about this issue. And I think there's a general agreement that this is valuable. But how best do we put this together in some type of a regional airport authority where each of the players can protect their interests? Because I think they realize that everyone would benefit from this. Without reliable commuter service, that executives, if we're trying to attract the right kind of economic development in the city, they need to have reliable commuter service to run their businesses, to reach their customers, and they don't have that now. So if all of us, each one of these quad cities expects to have the ability to grow into the future, they're going to have to make a contribution to make this happen. A $4 million terminal is really beyond what we can do individually as a city in the short term. We can expand, strengthen, and lengthen the runway with about a 9-to-1 match from FAA funds, and I think that's a legitimate expectation that we can work on in the short run while we're trying to find consensus and agreement regionally for longer-term development by upgrading the terminal and the other facilities. So I think it's something that the council should really emphasize and work on, both in the long term and the short term for the runway.
Great. Okay, Councilwoman Cantelmi?
Yes, I'm in favor of a regional airport as well. I know a lot of people have been curious as to the benefit to the other parts of the area that might be interested in joining us in that. There are models out there of other regional airports, I think, that could be looked at and analyzed to see how the other regions benefited from that. It goes without saying that the economic development, our fire, we need this airport for the airplanes, during a fire for all of the Yavapai County and several other areas. So I don't think anybody can argue with that. But again, I think in terms of being able to study this, we should look at some of the other models that fit our criteria, that are very similar to us, and we can see what the benefit would be, and maybe go out and sell that to the other regions if they are not sure that they would like to join this. But again, one of the other questions that came up here was the additional noise to the proposed non-existent annexation out there. I think if that has to happen, the builders, that would have to be disclosed right up front to any potential buyers. It would just be matter of fact part of a contract in the disclosures. So thank you.
Great. Councilwoman Scholl?
So I want to continue that topic about sound, about the noise concerns, and I think when I was kind of trying to look at some other regional airports that have come together to kind of get some ideas on how Prescott could try to create something like that. And something I came across was the Hollywood Burbank Airport Authority has actually worked with homeowners and schools to help install soundproofing insulation. So I think maybe we could look into that somehow. Also, talking to developers and encouraging them to include soundproofing in their development plans, along with the disclosure, I think would be incredibly important, just so that the homeowners are aware of what's going on around their home.
Great.
Some of that noise can be addressed with building practices, better quality windows and better insulation values. The problem is a lot of the developers don't have that built in their budgets, and all of a sudden these homes become, unattainable for most people.
If I can, Mayor, real quick. There's an overlay on every airport in the state of Arizona, and that overlay protects that airport, and it's also voted on in the general plan by the public. And when you buy a piece of property in the airport zone, it's in your title agreement when you buy that house that you are in an airport zone. And let's not forget that the jets are getting quieter today with today's technology, and they're not as loud as they are. And to use that as a reason not to have an airport is hindsighted.
Councilman Vachica.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually really agree with Councilman Blair. Right now, the other communities in our area already get the benefits. Their property, the city lines come very close to where the airport sits currently. And I think that getting them involved is going to be a very difficult process. I think something that we may want to do is approach Embry-Riddle and see if there's something they'd like to be, if they'd like to be involved in the project at all. I know that for the Daytona campus has the ATP, or the Air Transport Pilot portion of their program. If there's a way we could bring that here to Prescott, we'll get the revenue from people buying things here, the students coming in to buy things. That could be a really positive thing, but we need to approach Embry-Riddle and see if they're interested in doing something like that. Maybe they want more ramp space, maybe they want more office space in a new terminal, but I think they should be approached. The other thing that I wanted to bring up as well is that we don't want to give away our naming, right? We don't want to be, it shouldn't be the Prescott Valley Regional Airport. It shouldn't be the Chino Valley Regional Airport. It should be the Prescott Regional Airport. From the very start of the campaign, I've been very adamant that we should have a lot of say in what happens to the airport because we're making the payments on it. We're paying for the improvements, we're paying for deficits. That falls on us, and I think we shouldn't give that away to other communities.
Councilman
I
Good?
think that would be a function of how this authority potentially was structured. How the size of the authority's board, representative members on that board, and clearly, since it's primarily Prescott's responsibility, we should have probably the bulk of representation. And it'll also depend on how much financial support comes from each one of those entities in addition. So it's just a matter of how you structure it and make sure that each of the entities feel that they have sufficient representation and influence so that they can look out for the best interests of their community. As far as requiring soundproofing, I think that it's important that the developers provide this option. I'm not of the opinion that we have to make regulations in that area. This should be appropriate options for buyers. It does increase their cost, but that's up to the developer to make the decision on how best to build in those options to the people who want to purchase and live near the airport. But those aviation easements in their deeds have to be strong, and they have to be enforceable so that we don't run into situations where I've seen it many times throughout the country where people move into these areas understanding that they're living next to an airport, understanding there's going to be noise, and then after they live there, they approach the government saying, this has to stop. And then they want their residences bought out by the city to create a bigger buffer zone. So the time to create a good buffer zone is now, while the developments are being occurred around the airport. So with good planning, we should be able to address that.
What I recall as we've done these forums is that there's been pretty much consensus in regard to the airport that we all would like to move forward. I think that's obvious. I think we're at a time with our local economy that we are trying to do some creative things by creating jobs with an incubator and trying to harness the intellectual capital from our universities, that this is a very, very important asset as you start looking at some of the things we're trying to do. So I think there's consensus in regard to developing the airport. That's not the issue. The real issue and the heavy lifting is how do you get it done? And it's high time we get this done. We've talked about it for far too long. I'd like to commission the city manager. Do you have a pencil over there to take some notes? Okay.
I do, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to commission the city manager and staff to do the work to really study 5 or 6 different situations around the country to figure out what worked well. Situations that are very similar to ours, where you have small municipalities that are trying to get this done with one municipality that owns that airport. I think there's got to be some great opportunities for us to learn. We don't need to reinvent the wheel on this, but it's important to figure out how this is put together and to begin the process with our neighbors to really come together and try to get a deal together so that we can get moving forward. That is the real issue, is how to put that deal together and get everyone at the table to buy into how we're going to get this done. In terms of noise, I would have to say that I agree that, you know, there's disclosure. There's areas around that airport that, as Councilman Blair mentioned, where it's even on your title that's fully disclosed. And so I think, you know, you need to know what you're getting into when you buy a home near the airport, and there is going to be some noise associated with that. And so in regard to noise, I think, you know, buyer beware. You need to make sure you're paying attention in regards to what you're getting into. Any other comments? Yes, Councilman Machica.
Yeah, just, thank you, Mayor. Just to talk about the noise as well, is that our airport is definitely special compared to a lot of other airports really around the country because of Embry-Riddle. Their traffic accounts for most of what makes the airport what it is, but we are the 3rd busiest airport in the state and the 35th busiest airport in the country. Our airport is busier than some states' airports or any airports in those states. So as far as noise goes, I don't know if we should necessarily mandate it, but it should be a strong push to try to make those building materials part of that plan. Because realistically, any of the complaints are going to fall back down to the city, and we're going to have to deal with those. Thanks.
Very good. Any other comments on this one? No? Seeing none, we'll move on to number 4. Thank you, Vinny.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Approve setting aside a $100,000 fund to be used for a downtown business incubator and to encourage economic development and business-related tourism.
Okay, this has been a topic that we've approached in the past in regard to the incubator, at least for economic development. Any comments from the council? Yes, Councilwoman Scholl.
I think in forums past, we all have agreed that economic development is important in trying to bring industry to Prescott, and I am in favor of working towards bringing a business incubator downtown. However, I'm a little concerned about the statement, encourage economic development and business-related tourism. I just think that's a little broad right now. I would like to see us come up with some specific uses of that money, just so that the taxpayers know what that money will specifically be used for. And I think an incubator would be fantastic. I'd also like to see the incubator maybe incorporate some shared space, some meeting rooms, some conference rooms, so that those in the community who may not be interested in starting a business feel that they can still use the incubator for organization meetings or something of that sort, just so that it's more of an inclusive community asset.
Okay, Councilman Machica.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilwoman Scholl. Realistically, we need to start putting more money into our economic development. We're seeing that Prescott Valley privately spends $300,000 or $400,000 for their economic development for themselves, and it's done. They've done very well from it. They've pulled a lot of our business away from us, and that's money that we could be getting into our general fund. We used to set aside $250,000 for economic development for the city, and $200,000 of that went into what was called the Prescott Area Economic Development Corp. Now, when that happened, when we put that money forward, the other municipalities did not quite put as much forward. But when we did, Prescott Valley got M&I Windows and Doors, they got a print company, and they also got Ace Hardware. And the city of Prescott never saw anything from that for the money that we invested. So I'm really skeptical about putting or having a regional group for that, just because in the past we've seen that it hasn't benefited us. And we should benefit from the money we put forward. I think that we could pull money from our tourism, because we're putting about $600,000 into tourism right now, which is great because we are a tourism destination. But that $600,000, part of that did end up coming from the money we put into economic development initially. So I'm advocating for pulling that back. Part of it can go towards the incubator, and then more of that can go towards staff, like having a dedicated industrial recruitment specialist for the city staff. Thanks.
Councilman Blair.
Yeah, I don't know how much you want to fund for anything, to be very candid with you. I think the private sector has done quite well here, and as somebody that was born and raised here, you know, going back to 1974, I remember the same very argument, we need to keep our brightest kids here in the community. And those brightest kids have come back to this community. I can name a bunch of them, especially one of them that owns Olson's Grain that went to Colorado State University and got a degree in engineering. He's here today. I think it has to do with the private sector. And I think it has to do with our laws that we have in the community of how we not make it burdensome to have people come into the community with all these rules and regulations to keep them out of our community. We need to make it business friendly to entice them here. And I think when we do that, Tom, when you start talking about, Joe, when you start talking about Print Pack and the folks that have gone to Prescott Valley, you know, they have flatland, we do not.
Right.
And when you start talking about the things that we have here in the community, whether you like it or not, we have Ruger that's been very successful. We had a plant, the group of people that were out there called an engineering company that produced motors all over the United States into the 60s, 70s, and 80s called U.S. Electrical Motors. We've been very successful in having some great paying jobs in the community. The question becomes is how do we continue to retain those? And I think what we do now with partners like Embry-Riddle and like Pike College, like Prescott College, we entice the opportunity to be able to provide programs to train people, to keep them here, and excite business enterprises in Prescott, Arizona. I don't think it's always about how much you can throw at something.
Councilman Good.
I agree with Councilman Blair, but I'm a little bit reluctant to invest this type of money from the city. The last thing we need is a government trying to pick and choose who's going to be the winners and losers in different economic sectors. We definitely have to bring in the business community to support such a program, and if anything, we should be a small minority investor, allowing maybe the location or finding a building that would be suitable that we could then have the business community support. That way the business community is determining what segments of economic development are going to be emphasized, and that's where it needs to stay. Streamlining our processes, I think, is extremely important. I've talked to a couple of local developers that had tried to do commercial development in the city, and that seems to be a common thread, that working with staff seems to be more focused on what you can't do instead of how quickly we can get to a yes, so we can get these businesses up and going and prosperous. So that would be my take on this. I think we can look at GPREP as a pretty good example. The last couple of years, GPREP has been a terrible investment for the city. We got virtually nothing out of that, and it was mostly municipal support rather than from the business community. So we have to bring in the business. We have to bring in these new technology companies, and I think our economic development consultant, Jim Robb, has just done a terrific job in the last 6 months or so. So we need to support that going forward. But again, I think we should have a much more modest consideration as a minority partner in a project like this.
Councilwoman can tell me.
Yes, I'm in agreement with that. If the incubation center is looking for seed money, I am sure that many people that have a vested interest in this would be willing to invest with a return on their money, by the way. If the city decides to get involved and supply a portion of that seed money just to get them off the ground, I think it needs to be considered, but repaid as you know, the successes start to mount up. I think the incubation center is a fabulous idea. A lot of times just facilitating something like that, but the city, I believe too, does have to get out of its own way. We've got to facilitate and help these businesses smooth the path, make things a little bit easier for them, exercise a little more common sense. I've been very involved in a lot of projects down here, and it's not an easy road to get through. You're mired in a lot of government regulation that I think could be softened in many ways, maybe even go away. So as far as putting $100,000 up for the incubation center as a city, I would not encourage that, but I would facilitate the interested parties to participate in funding this thing, because with a payback. And again, there would be, if some of these young, let's say some of these brilliant minds were to come in here and just don't have the money, but they've got the knowledge. I know from starting out my own business, it would be really nice to have somebody with a little, we used to call it angel money, to help them out just to get off the ground. But again, in the contract, if they were to become successful, there's got to be a vehicle for repayment of some sort.
Great. Councilman Machica.
I actually agree with Councilwoman Gintoni. I think that repayment could be a great option. And again, part of the public-private partnerships I think we can look for is Sanford Riddle or any of the other schools we have in our area. That's where students are going to come. That's where we can retain our students. That's how we can keep people here. So a repayment option might not be a terrible idea.
Well, I think, market determines what's going to work. If this is a good idea, if the market's going to determine if it's going to work, and if it's a good idea, then there's going to be private money get behind this because they're going to want a piece of the action. They're going to make some money. So I would not be for the city subsidizing this kind of endeavor. If you think about it, we already really are with Jim Robb. And Jim Robb's doing a great job. We're paying his salary. He's doing a great job of making connections, building relationships, coming up with ideas. And so in essence, in that way, you could say that we are actually subsidizing the concept, but that's his job to make sure that it happens, to put together the right plan, the right people, and the right money. And I think it's private money that comes together to make this happen. In terms of streamlining or making our city more business friendly, I think we've got to reduce regulation as much as we can. We've got to figure out how to make it easier for people to do business in this city. We've got to figure out how to get to yes as quickly as we can and make sure that we're helping people. It's not to say that we need to lower standards, but we just need to be more business friendly and make sure we get stuff done in the city. Other comments? Yes, Councilwoman Scholl.
Jim Robb's name has been thrown around a couple times, and it's too bad he's not here tonight because I'd really like to hear from him and his perspective on whether or not the city does need to be putting up a significant amount of money, whether or not that's repaid. So I think moving forward with this, we should have a conversation with him and really, he's the expert on what our city's trying to accomplish in terms of bringing tech industry here, and so I think a conversation with him would really kind of shed some light on some questions at least I have about this.
Other comments on this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move on. Now on your agenda, you see that there's a legislative agenda. There's 6 different items listed here. And what I thought we might do, given the time, we're just about 6:25 here, is maybe take about 10 to 15 minutes, and rather than go down each one of these and every one of us comment on each one, let's just take some time, self-moderate to make sure you're not talking too much. And I think you've done a good job so far, but let's just open it up for any comments on any one of these 6 legislative items. Councilman Blair.
Okay, I'm going to do it, and I've said it before over and over again. The city is constructed with a bunch of great people in our community. We have a charter that we have to follow, and that charter dictates several things. However, a lot of times we are preempted by state law. And I want to share with the folks that are out there the ability, number 2, the ability for the charter cities to add fees to water bills to create a steady source of revenues to support our fire and police. What has got this community in trouble over the last 20 to 30 years is the fact that we don't have the ability to charge a fee on our water bill for our fire and our police. We have the ability to charge for sewer, water, solid waste. But when it comes to public safety, we don't have that opportunity. Nor do we have the opportunity to charge on building permits a public safety impact fee. So when you look at Granite Hills Estates and you look at some 200 plus new homes that do not pay anything on their permits to provide for hard infrastructure costs for a fire station, police station, employees, fire trucks, we have to take all that money out of our general fund. That's what's putting the death knell in this community. Until we get the state of Arizona to give back our ability as a charter community to run our community what best serves the citizens, we're going to be in harm's way with public safety for a long time. In my opinion, on this list of 7, that is the number 1 that needs to be addressed by the state of Arizona. Give us back our flexibility to do what's right for our community.
Okay. Councilman Machiga.
Can I just say, I agree wholeheartedly with you. Councilman Blair. I think that the state needs to stop usurping local authority. Seriously, we need to stop letting them take things from us. And a really good example of that, too, is the HERF funds. That's set aside for local infrastructure, and now the state uses it for other things. We need to start bringing that money back here, and I think that it's important to push for any of our legislation to make sure that that doesn't happen. Also, just to touch on number 5, to consider allowing the state treasurer to manage the pension plan. I don't think that the government should be involved in, or especially elected officials should be involved with managing a fund like that. I think that what we should be doing is, for the state pension plan, we should just have more oversight and authority, get an annual report from, or to the legislature and to participating agencies so we can make decisions, and before anything happens like it did again, we can nip that in the bud.
Okay, Councilman Good?
Well, I have comments on a couple of these things. I agree with Councilman Blair. A lot of the restrictions that have been placed on the city, especially SB 1525 and impact fees, were primarily a result of the real estate meltdown. Developers needed some help in continuing to operate, and they were able to lobby the legislature to have these impact fees taken away. Well, I think we've recovered pretty well from that. So restoring this ability to the cities is essential for us to operate going forward in the future. As long as we're an attractive state and an attractive community, people are going to want to come here, and the municipalities and the cities are required to provide these services. When we have to rely on sales tax that fluctuates depending on the business cycle, it's not like we can lay off firefighters and police from one year to the next. We have to provide those services, and being able to attach them to our water bills would provide a consistent source of revenue that we could manage effectively on our city budgets. When it comes to reforming PSPRS, granted, 443 was decided, the public decided they wanted this revenue to come into the city. This problem is not going away. It's going to be with us for decades. And we have to have strong discipline in managing these funds so that they're used the way they're intended, which is to pay down this PSPRS liability for as much and rapidly as possible. So reform has to happen in the state legislature. Otherwise, the system is going to collapse in the long run. Allowing the state treasurer to do this investment, I think, is a great idea. Jeff DeWitt's team has done a phenomenal job, superior performance over PSPRS. And a state treasurer is an elected official that can be held accountable for the performance that this appointed board has been horrible in its investments. So if we just switched our investment from PSPRS to the Treasurer's Department, we'd increase our return about three percentage points, and that would be very significant going along in the long run. So I would support that strongly.
Councilwoman Contelli.
I would also, again, I've got to remind everybody on the PSPRS board, where the fund managers, I believe it was in 2016, made $160 million and the fund made $60 million. So there is something very seriously wrong with this. If it were to be passed to the treasurer's office, the fund manager fees would go away. I think they would be minimized. He would be able to negotiate that in a different way that the board does. Historically, many members of the board, the PSPRS board, had very little experience in investing. So I'm not even sure, I don't understand why they didn't negotiate these fees to the fund managers. So I would definitely support that going to the treasurer's office. Also, several of these things on a local level are difficult for us to do anything about, but other than support our legislatures to try to, basically we would send the message to them exactly what we need. So, absolutely I'm supporting many of these propositions here on the legislative agenda.
Councilwoman Scholl.
In terms of looking at reforming our state pension plans, at least the way this is written, I think it's important to remember there are many different state pension plans. So I would like to say this specifically is PSPRS, because there's ASRS, there's quite a few others, so it's important to keep that in mind that we're just talking about, at least from what I've heard, PSPRS. And while I do think it absolutely does need to be restructured, it's obviously not working, it's affecting many municipalities across the state. It's important to remember that we are also talking about the livelihood of our police and firefighters, so we need to keep that in mind when looking at what type of reform we would like to see with that. And then I agree with Councilman Blair on the ability to add fees to our water bills for public safety expenses.
Councilman Blair.
I just want to share one thing. I know the state and our legislatures and our senators, they're down there and they're working for us, but it's kind of like walking up a hill that you can't get to the top. When you start talking about retirement for public safety, let's not forget the city of Prescott is the employer, and we fund their jobs, and we also fund their retirement. The city of Prescott needs to be given back the autonomy to hold those funds for our employees and invest those monies within our financial group here in the Prescott area. If they work 30 years and they retire, and we as a city of Prescott right now are putting $25,000 towards each firefighter and police officer, roughly. After 20 years, they have $500,000, 30 years, they have $750,000. Where can you get that kind of money working in the private sector? If you took that money and put 2% interest rate on it at the bare minimum and held it that for them, and they decided to retire after 30 years, we as a council should say, thank you for your service, shake their hand, and give them a check. We should not be the government that babysits their retirement until they're in the grave, period.
This is an idea that I've heard before on the radio. I think it was a little while ago, but anyway, I think it's definitely something that we need to look at with PSPRS. I love the idea of trying to bring it back here to our city where we could control it. Right now it's very difficult. We don't have that kind of control. So I think PSPRS is something that continually needs to be looked at, and hopefully we can get to some reform on that, because it definitely needs the reform. Only part of the equation was passing Prop 443. The other very important part is to make sure that PSPRS is reformed. I think local control is very important to me as well. I know I sit on the school board here in town, and I really value local control. Have always valued the fact that that board locally would have more control. And I think it's important when we look at development and impact fees that we figure out a way that we can fund police and fire in a more feasible way. And it has been done in the past. I agree with Councilman Good that I think we're in a better situation now where we could hopefully have the legislature relook at that and free that up so that we can have some more local control. I hope you're taking notes, City Manager, whether you can get this to our legislators.
I am.
Yes,
Mayor. I will
okay.
take all these notes.
So I think, there's lots of good things here on this agenda. The HERF funds, I know that's been something ongoing that have been swept, and we've requested the legislature to take a look at that so that we could have those funds back here locally. Any other comments from the council?
There was one on here that kind of piqued my interest when it came to notifications, legislation that would allow the city to publish public notices online instead of requiring costly print publications. This could save the city thousands of dollars every year. I'm just going to say, from an old-time standpoint of somebody that wants to have a newspaper in my face and reads it, whether it's in the restroom or whether it's in the kitchen table. I am an old-fashioned guy that looks at my computer one time a day, and I'm out working. So I want to see those public notices in print as well as online. We have young folks that are sitting up here, Joe and Alexa, that might do everything they do online, but I'm still an older folk, and we have more older folk that live in the city of Prescott, and I think we do a huge disservice to this community if it were to be one way or the other. So I would suggest that we take every opportunity to notify the public through every means possible.
Okay, other comments?
Councilman Machiga.
Yeah, I actually think that we should have both as well. I think it's important to understand what our population is. And a lot of people do read the paper. I think it's important to make sure that they're not excluded from any of the public notices. However, I do think that we should have the online ones as well, but definitely not get rid of the print publication just because they're utilized here.
Councilwoman Scholl?
We're in an interesting time where we're not completely paper, but we're not completely paperless, and you have people who have different preferences, and so I think it would be remiss to go ahead and completely transfer to something online when a lot of our people are used to seeing notices in print. And things to think about are what would transitioning to online only, what would the effect of printers would that cause? Do we have data on how many people in the community have easy access to high-speed internet so that they could actually read these notices? So I think there's a lot of components to this that would have to be thought about and considered before deciding to, go to an online form. But I think it would be a slow transition. Like I said, we're just kind of in this very interesting time where it's people just have their preferences and they're not the same.
Councilwoman Cantali?
I would agree of having something optional. So let's just say we give people the option. Maybe we don't have to legislate this. I think people could go to a site and register whether they want to have paper or not, and let's just see how much money we'd save. I would venture to guess most people today have a computer in their home, and I agree with Steve. I'm the old school too. I like to read paper. I like to keep paper, but I would like to have the option to save some money too.
Any other comments? Councilman Good?
I'll add a couple of cents of comments here. Our American Legion and VFW posts have been trying to accomplish the same goal for the last several years, but we have a significant number of elderly veterans who don't use computers, won't use computers, so I think we have to maintain this print publication option, especially when you realize for notices like this, we want to make sure that we have every opportunity to keep our citizens engaged, not find a reason for them not to know what's going on in the community. So we need to be practical and continue to support their engagement so that they're aware. And that's the most important thing, is to have informed voters. Thanks.
Any other comments on the legislative agenda from the council? Lynn, is there anything else we need to do before we wrap up here? No? Well, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. I'd like to thank Clerk Vinnie for your help tonight, and City Manager Fan, thank you for being here and your contributions as well. Thanks to Lynn again for setting all this up, and thank all of you for being here tonight on behalf of the council. We want to thank you for being concerned and informed voters. Great job, and make sure you grab a cookie on the way out. Thanks.